And yet I've started a bunch of companies in the biotech field. Now, I barely knew what a biology was, but what I did have was the ability to use the English language, both spoken and written, persuasively, and to be able to take brilliant scientists' ideas and translate them into something that finance people on Wall Street could understand. And I was able to start several companies that way, and one of them we sold for a few $100 million, and then another one ended up becoming a public company, all because I was able to get people who were really, really smart at the things that I needed to know to teach me what I needed to know in order to help them fulfill their dreams.
You are now listening to the Going North podcast with your host, author and speaker, Dom Brightmon. And every Monday and Thursday, you're going to hear the voice of a different author share their stories, expertise, and their struggles that they had to overcome in life to leave you inspired to get more out of your life. Be sure to not only listen to this episode, but share with others, connect with the authors, and always advance others to advance yourself. Now let's get on with the show. And today on the Going North podcast, it's the 2-year anniversary, baby. 2 years, baby, since this podcast has started, and we got a superstar for you today. This wonderful guest right here has been doing amazing things for 40 plus years, and this wonderful gentleman right here has been engaged as a self-employed entrepreneur, first in finance and then real estate, and then for the last 20 years in creating and funding startup companies. And he's founded 11 companies, 10 of which were successful in varying degrees and helped to fund perhaps 50 more, some of which were spectacularly successful and some were failures. And he learned a lot from both outcomes, including the obvious. Success is a lot more fun than failure. But he also learned that in the U.S., failure is not fatal and can be a stepping stone to future success. His initial training was a lawyer, and he worked for a major LA law firm for about 4 years before leaving to get some business experience, and finally to start his own businesses. And this led him to publishing the book Dream Toolbox, Building an Entrepreneurial Mind and Financial Abundance. And for those who haven't been living under 40 rocks, you probably know who this is. It's the one, the only K.A. himself, Kenneth C. Aldrich. How are you today, sir?
I am fine. I don't know how to live up to that build-up, but thank you very much.
Oh, don't worry. You've been living up to it, and the good news is there's more to come indeed.
Well, that I'm counting on.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's an honor having you on. A wonderful gentleman's been building businesses for years, and I believe one of your degrees is from Harvard, too, right?
Yeah, well, actually two of them. I took an undergraduate degree at Harvard, and then I went down to New York, allegedly on a scholarship, but pretty much goofed off for about a year, and then decided I better find a way to earn a living, so I went back to Harvard Law School and graduated from the law school as well.
Woohoo! Double champion. My man, double champion, baby. Congratulations.
Well, it's a great education. I'll tell you one thing, though, that I learned, and that is, and unfortunately some people never learn it, but the value of whether it's law school or undergraduate in a really top school, the greatest value is the people you meet and the intellectual stimulation they provide, and, of course, sometimes some of the professors. But once you've left there and been gone for 3 or 4 years, it doesn't matter where you went to school. It matters what you learned along the way, because the degree will get you the first job, and beyond that, if you learned a lot, you're in great shape, and if you wasted your time even at a very good school, it won't do you much good.
Yeah, you're definitely right about that. Heck, even remember getting an IT degree a few years ago, and I probably only used maybe probably 10% of what I learned in class in actual real life. And it might even still be a generous number of what actually used from that education.
Well, but that's not necessarily a bad percentage. Many years ago, after I had left law and I was having a conversation with my wife, and I was lamenting the fact that, I spent 3 years in law school and 4 more years practicing law, and I said, boy, what a waste that was, considering that I'm now in the real estate business, which I was at the time. And she said, Ken, you have no idea how often you use the things you learn, and yet you just don't realize it. It's just because it's part of your mental DNA by now. And I thought about it, and I realized she was absolutely right, that I used the things I learned in school in a variety of ways that I would never have predicted or thought about. And I suspect the same thing is true in IT and almost any other profession.
Solid right there. I guess that's why usually when it comes to folks who are married, you refer to the wives as the better half for a reason.
Well, she was remarkable, so I listened to her advice not often enough. Let's put it that way.
Man. Yep. Yeah, sometimes the advice is hidden beneath a lot of other stuff. It's like maybe 300 words to get to the 10 words that make the most impact.
You never know. I was very, very lucky for 40 wonderful years, so I have no complaints about that part of my life.
Woohoo! Well, amen to that. Amen to that. Well, 4 decades of wonderful living, more to come, and part of that living you're able to bring into the world, in this case, the business of immortality, as I sometimes call it, the dream toolbox. So how's it feel?
Well, I tell you, it's been a very interesting and a very rewarding journey for the last few years. If I can go back just a little bit and tell you some of the backstory, you'll understand where I'm coming from. The whole idea for Dream Toolbox began because I'd had a long-time interest in education and had gotten involved with the Harvard Graduate School of Education and with a student organization there, and volunteered here in Los Angeles as a mentor in some charter schools. And so I've been working in classrooms and teaching and trying to teach entrepreneurship to high school kids who don't get any of it in most schools, and no sense of even what it's about. But what I realized as I went along the way was that a couple of things. One negative, and that was I'd be in a classroom of 30 kids, and I'd go in every week for a semester or 2 semesters. And if I was really lucky, maybe 2 or 3 out of the 30 would have the light bulb go off above their head at some point, and they'd say, wow, there is a world out there beyond getting my diploma or my GED degree and going to work for Walmart or becoming a barista at Starbucks. There's more out there, and I don't have to just work for somebody for the rest of my life. That was sort of the good news and the bad news, because it was great when it happened, but it was a very small percentage of a very small number of people. So I started thinking about, what if I could reach more people with the same message? And that was reinforced because I was giving about once or twice a year, I would go sit on a panel in a program that was run by a good friend of mine, which we'd have 75 or 100 high school and junior high school kids, middle school kids, and I'd talk about entrepreneurship and so on. And it was often only 20 minutes out of a day-long program that they had. But more than once, I had one of these kids come up to me afterward and say, something you said was really important to me. And one of them went on to start a business with a little help from me, and others just changed the vector of their lives. But what I realized was that it wasn't the wisdom imparted over a long period of time as often as it was one comment, one chance thing that maybe was a throwaway line from me, but that change the vector of somebody's life. So I said, okay, I've got to try to put down the story of my own experiences, and then let whoever reads it take from it whatever they will or not. And that was the start of Dream Toolbox. The idea was not to write a textbook on how to do an entrepreneurial adventure, how to start a company. There's plenty of those out there. If you need the nuts and bolts of starting a company, there are great books and all kinds of courses you can get. But what wasn't out there was anything that sort of talked about the mindset that it took and the changes that most of us have to make to reach that mindset to make entrepreneurism possible. So that's what I set out to do. I started out with a series of blogs that are still embedded in my website at dreamtoolbox.com. But then my friend said, okay, if you want to have credibility, you got to write a book. And I said, I don't want to write a book. It's tedious work. I hate it. And they said, yeah, you got to write the book. So I did, and it took about 6 months, and because I found I couldn't write for very long at one day before I started sounding like an old schoolmaster instead of a friend that somebody could actually learn from. So I would write until I sensed that my writing was getting stilted, and then I'd close it up and go back at it the next day. And eventually, Dream Toolbox emerged, and we launched it in May 1st, and we were lucky enough to get Amazon bestseller status for a new book at the launch time, and we're still selling some books. So I'm hoping that among those who read it and pass it on to friends, there will be some people who see things about the opportunities in their lives that they just didn't know were there. And so that's the hope and that's the dream that I have with Dream Toolbox. But I've rambled on a long time. You may have totally different questions for me, so I'll stop.
Hey, it's all good. It's all good. And I love the fact that you touched on a very powerful point with folks who may be wanting to write their books one day is to write like you're writing towards a friend, not like a schoolmaster.
Yeah. No, fortunately, I had a very good mentor who would read the manuscript and say, okay, this doesn't sound like you anymore. You've got to, if it's to have any impact, it's got to sound like you having a conversation with a friend. And hopefully I achieved that. When you write one, you're always too close to it to know whether you've really succeeded or not. But I'm getting pretty good feedback on that because, as I say, I don't have a clue what things will trigger something good in somebody. I've been very surprised by people who've come up to me and said, oh, you talked about X, and that was just life-changing for me. And I thought to myself, gosh, I didn't really make a big deal out of that, but it was a big deal to them, and that's all that matters.
And that's got to be like one of the, I guess, weirdest and at the same time amazing feeling at the same time. It's like when you write something and then one part that really didn't hit you as hard or heck in a way may have meant to be a throwaway line, someone else actually sees that as like the golden nugget to help them keep pushing along. It's just an amazing thing.
It really is, and I think it's true for all of us. I don't think it's anything unique to me because you don't know what in somebody else's life will turn out to be inspirational for you. So when I was writing and thinking about it, and now that I've kind of learned my lesson whenever I talk to groups of students, I tend to spend more and more time just telling stories of the things that have happened to me, both the good and the bad, in the entrepreneurial world, and obviously try to draw conclusions from those that may be helpful because I don't know. I don't know what's going to sound like old hat stuff that, oh, yeah, I've heard that before, and what's going to be, oh, wow, I never thought of that. So we beat on boats against the current.
That's right. That's right indeed. And so far, well, from what I've read from the book, it seems great thus far in the fact that you're able to break it down in simple chapters as well. It's like not those 20, 30-page chapters that take you forever to finish. It's like you, in a way, give the reader that sense of completion with at least a good couple pages.
Well, I hope so. I mean, that's both was intentional and driven by the fact that I'm aware that uh, each successive generation, I think, has a shorter attention span, and so we need to break life's lessons down into bite-sized pieces. But I realize also that it's true for all of us, even old geezers like me who grew up in a different educational system. Our ability to focus on multiple things at once in a way that's impactful to us is somewhat limited. So I tried to figure out what are the really key things that can make a difference. And so, for example, the starting point really in many ways was just changing the belief system, which is, I think, the core of the book, frankly. If I can help people change their belief system from I can't to I can, almost everything else becomes possible. There's a wonderful quote that I stole from Henry Ford, which says, whether you believe that you can or you believe that you can't, you're right, because our beliefs determine where we go in life. And so that was kind of the starting point for my thinking about what a dream toolbox was. But then the other part of it was that most people, I've discovered, don't have a very clear idea of what their dreams really are. And they don't have the ability, or haven't learned the ability, I should say, to visualize the dream that they have, whatever it may be. I'll come back to that in a minute, in a way that's so tangible and so real that it's almost as if it had already happened. And the analogy that I think about is we've all wakened up from a dream, a sleeping dream, a real dream, that was so real and so tangible that it takes us a little while to realize whether we're awake or sleeping. And if we can train our minds to see ourselves as successful in whatever our dream is and practice that thinking, not in the future, not say someday I will be rich and famous or someday I will develop a cure for cancer, but I have developed the cure for cancer. And imagine what our lives would be like at that point, where we'd live, who we'd associate with, what brilliant minds would we have access to talk about. All of those things. And I used to stand in front of a mirror or sit in front of a mirror for about 10 minutes a day, just visualizing what it would be like if I got to my dreams. And I'll tell you, I felt so silly. It's unbelievable. But I had read about this and decided I was going to try it because I was like the people that I wrote my book for. I was feeling really stuck in my life. I had good degrees, I could get a good job, but I wasn't doing anything that really inspired me, and I wasn't getting any results that inspired me. And I did that for months, and then gradually it kind of became almost an ingrained habit, and I didn't have to stare at myself in the mirror to do it anymore. And then one day, a year or so later, I don't know how long it was really, I suddenly realized, wait a minute, you've achieved that dream that you had. Maybe it's time to set a new dream and set a new set of goals, which I ended up doing and have done so periodically in my life ever since. But it's that tangibility of the dream and not putting it in the future but bringing it into the present that for me was life-changing.
It's like, so I guess in a way like pre-playing the future in a way.
It is, but it's not so much planning as visualizing. The analogy that was given to me and got me started on it was, if your dream is to have a brand new Mercedes-Benz Maybach, for example, but whatever it is, a car, imagine yourself in that car. Imagine what the new leather smells like, what the finish feels like when you run your hand over it, what the burl wood on the dashboard feels like. All of those things, so that, and then the feel as you accelerate. Get those so ingrained that you think, okay, that's real. That's who I am. I'm a guy who drives a Maybach. I'm not a guy who drives a Pinto. And it becomes ingrained in you, and your subconscious mind, and I absolutely believe this, takes over at some point and directs your actions and directs your choices so that you move maybe in a zigzag, but you move constantly toward that goal. And the danger is that you get to the goal and don't set a new one, which happened to me, and I kind of floundered for 2 or 3 years after I kind of had my first major success. But it's analogous, I think, to the way the brain works on that, to the way in which I'm told the first moonshot was done. I've read somewhere that it was off course 95% of the time, but every time it would get a little off course, the computers would make a small course correction and bring it back and forth. So it ultimately got to the goal without really having to, hit every waypoint exactly right. So it's just a very valuable tool. The other thing that I think is extraordinarily valuable, and it's another part of what I wrote about in Dream Toolbox, is the the process of deciding what the dream is going to be. Because most of us either don't dream big enough, or we have dreams that are so far-fetched that they overwhelm us. And so what I encourage students to do when I'm working with them is say, look, sit down and take a piece of paper and turn off the TV and turn off your cell phone, whatever, and for 10 minutes write down as fast as you can everything that you would love to do. This is the important part. If you knew that you could not fail, and the brain, I guarantee you, will think of all the reasons not to write stuff down. Well, I couldn't really do that. I'm too small. I'm too short. I'm too rich. I'm too poor. But I usually say to the kids, look, imagine if Wilbur and Orville Wright had not written down in their minds, I'd like to create an airplane and fly it. We would never have had air flight. Actually, somebody else would have invented it. But the point is, the dreams can be really crazy. Then you put the list away, take it out the next day or the day after, then go through the list, and you can weed out the ones that are kind of fanciful and you don't really want to do it. But there'll be some in there that just say, yeah, you know what? If I knew that I couldn't fail at it, I'd do that. And then the next question is, then why not do it? And just make sure you don't fail. But that's a very, very powerful process to go through. And again, it makes you feel kind of foolish when you're doing it, frankly, because each of us, if we're honest, doesn't listen to the little voice that says, oh, don't write that down, it's silly, but writes it down anyway. Come up with some pretty amazing dreams and wishes, and they're often things that we've kind of been taught from childhood not to wish for. So it's a worthwhile exercise and a worthwhile drill.
Yeah, you're definitely right, and heck, even right about the small voice part, because it's like first time I did that a few years ago, it was definitely a lot of pushback from the mind, and it's really something you just have to just push through and just keep going with it. You have to follow through with it, no matter how dumb or silly you may feel, and then just seeing the results, just seeing that on paper, and coming back to it a little bit later, you realize, oh, okay. And you may even think of maybe even new ways to actually maybe make certain things manifest on the list.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. One of the things that also gets in the way of people fulfilling their dreams is the fear of failure. And I analyzed that at some length in my own head, first of all, and then I put some of that analysis down in the book. But one of the biggest deterrents to starting any project, particularly one that's a little bit scary, is the fear of failure. And we all kind of know that. But when I really looked at it, I realized it's not usually the fear that the project or the goal will fail. If I want to become a neurosurgeon, for example, and I'm a young person, the fear of failure is usually not that I won't make it as a neurosurgeon. The fear is that everybody will know that that's what I set out to do, and I didn't make it. And now I'm humiliated and embarrassed by my friend or among my friends or my wife or my family, whatever it is. And we cheat ourselves out of more opportunities because we're afraid of what will look like to others if we fail than we ever cheat ourselves out of any real fear of the actuality of the failure. There's a wonderful drill that is a little scary at first, but whenever I start a new project, particularly one that's fairly big and a little bit scary, or I'm about to make a big investment or something, I always look at it and say, okay, what's the absolute worst thing that could happen if this doesn't turn out well? And usually the worst thing that could happen is that I will A, lose some money, B, lose some time and going down a wrong road, and then C, will really embarrass myself with my friends. But if you can look into that abyss and say, okay, I can survive all of those things if they happen, then your brain gets freed up and you say, okay, now I'm going to go do it. And to heck with my fears, I've looked at them. The worst that can happen is I'll lose some money and be embarrassed. So what? My real friends are going to stick with me, and I can always make more money. And amazingly, things then start getting done that otherwise it's very easy to procrastinate and put off and never start. So I'm a huge believer in not letting fear of failure or procrastination kill the dream.
There you go, indeed. And it's good that you actually add that piece to the part of the whole puzzle. Is like think about what could possibly go wrong, and then just following through and realizing, hey, if there's like a small chance it might even actually happen, because it's like if you lose some folks, it's like, all right, that means they may have not been truly friends, and yeah, money can always replace itself. It's just a form of energy, so it's very true right there. And I think that's like another part of the visualization process that some folks may even fear, like they may fear the failure, and then visualizing it, that might even put them in a whole different dimension, metaphorically speaking, because it's like, oh gosh, this could be really bad.
Yeah, and there are probably some things that you'd look at and say, if the worst happens there, I don't want to deal with that, so I'm going to do something different. But I found that 99 times out of 100, when you really look at the fears, if it's something you genuinely want to do in the first place, the fears just diminish once you stare them in the face. There's an old quotation from Nietzsche which says, that which does not kill me makes me stronger. Well, I'm not sure I definitely am not a philosophic fan of Nietzsche per se, but that one statement, it has a lot of truth to it. If you can look at it and say, well, this isn't going to kill me, and I'll either succeed or I'll learn something from it, and either way I'm ahead of the game.
There you go, that's right. Because usually the action takers are the dream fulfillers.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And it's the whole entrepreneurial process is just fascinating, because once somebody has developed an entrepreneurial way of looking at life and looking at problems, it changes everything. The analogy that I come to frequently is that if you have an entrepreneurial mind, when you run into an obstacle in your career or whatever, the entrepreneur very seldom looks on it as a barrier. The entrepreneur will look at it as a puzzle. Okay, and the nature of a puzzle is there's always a solution to a puzzle. It's part of the definition of a puzzle. So if instead of seeing setbacks or barriers as this impenetrable wall that you can't get through, if people will say, okay, that's a puzzle, there must be a solution to it, I wonder if I can go over it or around it or under it or change it some way to make it work for me. And it's pretty amazing how often that happens. I see it all the time in entrepreneurs. Every business I think that I've ever invested in that's been a success has gone through what I call a near-death experience, because nobody gets it right the first time. And you're cruising along, and all of a sudden, oh, whoops, we're running out of money, or oh, whoops, the customers aren't reacting the way we expected. Whatever it is, it's a crisis, and it's, as far as the business is concerned, it's an existential crisis, because you either solve the puzzle or the business will fail. And the good entrepreneurs don't run away from that, and they don't let it paralyze them. They'll say, okay, that's really not working. What can we do? One of the most successful companies that I was involved as an investor and on the board of directors, but I was not an operational guy in it at all, was a company that started out with the dream of creating a debit card that teenagers who couldn't shop online, this goes back almost 2 decades, teenagers who couldn't shop online because they didn't have a credit card could take their allowance and go into a store and buy a debit card that said Visa or MasterCard on it, be able to use it online and use it to buy things. And nothing like that really existed. And so the company was founded, and I put some money in, and a bunch of friends put some money in, and we got into it a while, and we suddenly realized, whoops, there are a few teenagers using it, but not nearly enough for this company to survive. And the CEO, who's a brilliant CEO and a good friend and one of the smartest guys I know, looked at it and he said, okay, let's analyze who really is buying this card. And it turned out it was a whole different group of people. It was mostly adults, and it was by and large people who were in that $0 to $75,000 a year income range, where bank fees that the banks would charge them were really pretty high because they couldn't keep large balances, but they could use a debit card like this, and it was less expensive, and it gave them the equivalent of a credit card when they couldn't get a credit card often. And that simple change in perspective, plus a lot of hard work, turned that company, which was in some trouble at that point, into a multi-billion-dollar company on the New York Stock Exchange today. So it's often a matter of how you look at the challenge.
Yeah, you're definitely right about that, especially with the whole puzzle analogy, which is so true, because it's like you have this one big idea, but then out of nowhere you realize your customer base may not be the original intended one, and it ends up better than expected.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, and I see it so often that it's just it's really amazing. And I see it, in the finance side of it too. I mean, there was a company not too long ago that was struggling around, and they just couldn't get financing. They didn't need a whole lot of money, but they needed some to launch their product. And so I or one of the people that I was with, I can't remember even who came up with the idea, said, well, why don't you try crowdfunding? And they said, oh, okay. So they went out, connected with one of the crowdfunding sites, raised the money they needed, and they were off and running. And once they were successful, then, of course, the venture capitalists all wanted to finance them, but they didn't need it anymore. So, again, it was just a matter of looking at the puzzle a different way, and the answer then became obvious.
That's right. It's always good when the obvious choice becomes the obvious choice. Gets rid of the fog.
But it's so seldom obvious until after the fact.
Oh, man. Definitely right about that. Kind of like the whole hindsight being 20/20, right?
Yeah, well, it is, and of course, but that again is what for me, what Dream Toolbox is all about. It's getting people to imagine the dream and then say, okay, what mental tools do I need to have to fulfill my dream? And there are a lot of them, and I don't want to get into all the detail that took me a couple hundred pages to write about, but one of them, for example, is language, and how you can overcome a lot of things if you've mastered whatever language that you live in. In my case, it was English because I'm in the United States. But I never had in high school a science course beyond basic biology. I never had advanced math, and I never had any accounting courses. And got through law school. Still, I finally had an accounting course of sorts in law school. And yet I've started a bunch of companies in the biotech field. Now, I barely knew what a biology was, but what I did have was the ability to use the English language, both spoken and written, persuasively, and to be able to take brilliant scientists' ideas and translate them into something that finance people on Wall Street could understand. And I was able to start several companies that way. And one of them we sold for a few $100 million, and then another one ended up becoming a public company, all because I was able to get people who were really, really smart at the things that I needed to know to teach me what I needed to know in order to help them fulfill their dreams. And, it would have been much nicer if I had some basic biology, because most of what I do now is in the biology and medical device field. But I had to get it the hard way, but I got it. And I got it without ever had it in formal education, but by finding people who knew what I needed to know and creating a win-win situation with them so that we could go out and create companies and create value and change some lives for the better. So it's and different people will have different skills. In fact, a friend of mine says, because I always harp on language because I think it's the most important skill. And a friend of mine says, yeah, but you don't realize there's a second language that's coding and computer language. And she said it is a language. And those who are growing up and are young now who master that, it's as valuable as learning French or Chinese or Russian in the real world. It's just one more language and one more skill set. And that was an eye-opener to me. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Definitely an eye-opener right there. So any advice for those who may be wanting to learn how to better communicate? They may get to that position where they may have to relay the information from the technical folks to those who may be in control of the big decision making folks like CEOs or whatever. So any advice for those, since in a way you kind of have to be the middleman to give them the plain and simple version of the jargon and everything else that they learn, the scientific folks that they had to learn. So any advice for...
I never thought of myself as the middleman, for one thing. I always envisioned myself as the captain on the bridge and running the boat. But what I did learn, and I must say the advice would be learn to use your language and learn to write it well, learn to speak it well, take courses if you need to, because every one of us in every business or in every profession is selling from day one. I don't care whether I'm raising money or whether I'm trying to sell widgets. I'm still selling something. I'm selling myself, or I'm selling an idea, or I'm selling a concept. So if you can master those skills, then it's pretty easy, if you need to know something technical, as I did in the biotech world, to go to the people who are experts in it and say, look, I want to learn what you know, and I want to help you take what you know and make it into a wonderful business. And I never had any problem at all getting people to spend endless hours teaching me what I needed to know to make them successful. And that was always the key, is I had developed the skill to talk to both the scientists and to talk to Wall Street. And once I had that, then whatever I needed to learn technically, there was always somebody who was willing to help me learn it. And I spent hours with a Russian scientist who was one of the most brilliant women I ever met. And she would have me peering through the microscope for hours until my eyes hurt and trying to explain basic biology to me at a very high level, but still biology. And I learned enough so that I could stand up in front of a room of scientists and Wall Street analysts and not embarrass myself. But I only knew a narrow niche. But that was okay. I knew what I needed to know. And the net result was I was able to help make her a success. So it's a two-way street, but if you can communicate and sell yourself and your ideas, you can do almost anything.
Rock solid right there. Just know what you know and do it well.
Well, and know what you don't know and figure out how to get it. That's the other side.
Yeah, that's true. Don't want to be woefully ignorant. That's just a trap.
Yeah. Well, the hardest part is to know what it is you don't know, It's not willful ignorance. It's, I don't know that I don't know that I don't know it, or I don't know what I need to know, and that's one of the hardest parts. And I don't have an answer to that one. That just comes with experience and trial and error and making some mistakes.
Oh, yeah. And then speaking of experience, a question like to ask every guest, and that is if you were to wake up tomorrow and you're 25 again, but this time in the current year of 2019, what would be the advice that you would give to yourself?
Start now. I procrastinated for years because I believed that I needed just one more degree, just one more year of experience, just one more voice of approval from somebody that I considered an authority figure, when what I should have done was said, okay, here's your dream. Do what the Nike slogan says and just do it. Because procrastination is the thief of life. It steals your time, and time is the only thing you have in life. And so that would be my advice to myself, is don't waste that roughly 10 years that I wasted sticking around in jobs that I shouldn't have stayed in longer than I should have stayed in them, because I was fearful, because I thought I needed somebody's approval, or a myriad of reasons. And it was scary to start and just jump out into the pool, but it was the best thing I ever did. I just wish I'd done it younger.
Amen to that indeed. Amen to that indeed. And heck, maybe someone out there needs to hear that part, especially maybe stuck in a job that they may like but they don't love, and they may have this big dream that they want to chase and actually fulfill, but they just need that push to go out there and go get it.
Yeah. And procrastination is so easy, and it's born in fear. It's born in fear of failure or fear of embarrassment or whatever. When I left law practice from a firm, most of the lawyers that I worked with said, go for it, glad you're chasing your dream, etc. There were a few who were basically hostile. And I said to myself at the time, I hadn't figured it out yet, why are these guys hostile? I'm taking a big salary cut, jumping into a business where I may find myself, starving because I've been fired in another 6 weeks. Why would you be jealous of me? And then it suddenly dawned on me, because that small group wanted to do the same thing. They wanted something other than their lives, and they were afraid to do it. And, some of them eventually made the leap, and others probably didn't, and probably, are living on a nice pension now, having spent 20 or 30 years doing something they never really loved.
That's right. Nikes or not, just do it indeed. Well, all righty. For those who want to keep in contact with you and all the stuff that you're doing, what's the best way to reach out to you, Ken?
Best way of all is to go on the internet, Facebook, Instagram, but the web page is probably the best because everything is there in one spot. Just go to dreamtoolbox.com. Or if you want to get access to the book directly, go to Amazon and just put in Dream Toolbox, and if my SEO specialist is doing her job, it'll pop up as the very first thing. But it's just, all you have to remember is Dream Toolbox, the tools to fulfill your dreams.
Oh, yeah. Well, there you have it, folks. Head over to that dreamtoolbox.com. Pick up a copy or 57 copies of the wonderful book. Share with your friends and your family. Heck, even go back in time on the website and check out some of Ken's podcasts from back in the day where he had some episodes talking about some topics from the book as well. It's still good and a nice, short and sweet, too. So you get to keep some of your day after listening to the goodness as well. Well, all right. Is any parting words for the folks still listening, Ken?
If you have a dream, please don't look back 20 years from now and say, I wish I had. Just make it happen.
How's it going, you super special, awesome human? Since you made it to the end of this episode, it looks like you really enjoyed yourself. Since you enjoyed this episode, be sure to share it with at least 3 people in your network and tell them what you really liked about this episode. Heck, even shoot myself or the guests an email and let them know what you liked most about this interview, so that way they can stay inspired to keep pushing out great work.